Rachel wanted to buy this Advent candle holder that I didn't think was pretty, and it was also expensive. So I quickly designed something in SketchUp that would be fast to make, and I printed out 4 copies of this, and I'm going to make that as 4 segments that I cut out like that, and I'll cut that out of a piece of 2x6 lumber. I had previously planed that 2x6 flat, so it's a bit more precise than a regular 2x6. The parts didn't fit together entirely perfectly, so the next step was to use the belt sander to flatten and square the joint surfaces. Now it fits much better. Then I used my strip sander to remove the saw marks and smooth the outside curves. And the inside curves, I used the round part of my belt sander, but that couldn't get at all the curves. So the next step was to switch my strip sander over to a convex platen, and for that I have to take the table off. There's taking the flat one off and putting a wooden convex platen on. And then putting the table back on, and that way I can sand the inside curves with a strip sander. And of course most people would use a spindle sander to sand inside curves, but as you can see here, you couldn't really get in there with a spindle sander either. And now I don't need the template anymore, so tearing that off and chiseling off the rest of it, and then taking the remains off with the belt sander. Now I need a good way of joining those pieces together. A butt joint glued might have worked, but I decided to put a slot mortise into the ends. A biscuit jointer would have worked too. I actually have a biscuit jointer, but I don't have any biscuits. So slot mortise as it is. Now there's some darker square pieces that go on top of the base, and I'm cutting the edges of those with a bevel cut just to make it a little bit more fancy. The bevel cut is just by tilting the bandsaw table. And then cleaning those up on the belt sander using the pulley part as sort of a spindle sander. That way I can get the inside curves. And this is how it all fits together. But then I decided that ring was just a little bit too bulky, so I'm using scraps from my paper templates to draw a curve on there, and then I cut that out on the bandsaw. And then sanding a bevel on all the edges before I assemble it, because after it's assembled I wouldn't be able to get at there with a belt sander anymore. Those slot mortises are going to be joined with a floating tenon, and here I'm sanding the edges of that tenon round to fit in the slot mortises. Now that it fits, cutting the pieces to length. And then a dry fit before I glue it together. I'm gluing together 2 pairs of pieces first. And those pairs don't fit together perfectly, so I waited for the glue to dry and then sanded them flat on the belt sander. The ornamental detail makes for an excellent place to attach the clamps to. When I checked how it all looked together, I decided I needed to trim that ring a little bit more. So the squares that are part of the ring, I'm making those a little bit shallower by making 2 cuts with a table saw. And I'm using a table saw sled to jig that up. There was a very slight step where the pieces joined, so I'm using a belt sander to smooth that out. And I also sanded the top flat, especially to make for a better glue surface. And that slider on the side is to catch more of the sawdust with the dust collector. I used a Forstner bit to create a bigger shallow indentation in the upper squares. That's partially for decoration and partially to catch wax drippings. And then a smaller hole in the middle. And now I can finally glue all the pieces together. And after that it was the usual varnishing and sanding and varnishing again. I didn't take video, just my time-lapse camera captured it. The holes I drilled were just a tiny bit too small for the candles, so I had this idea of making a little candle resizer contraption. And clever as it was, it didn't work perfectly, although I was able to resize the candles to fit into the holes. And here it is all done. It took about 3 hours of shop time plus varnishing, and I got it done in time. But later I bought some cheap candles from a dollar store and cut those shorter just to get a more horizontal thumbnail for YouTube.